So, to begin with then, let's start off with the obvious question. Who is Azmat Mir?
That's an interesting question. Thank you very much.
It's a very philosophical question as well at the same time.
It is indeed. Azmat, yes. He's an interesting character, really, I suppose, and someone with a bit of a unusual sense of humour that's been built up over a good number of years. Anyone who knows me really well, when we get to that level of understanding, actually gets to understand my humour a lot more, and we can have an absolute riot.
Right.
But it can take a while for me to get comfortable enough with anyone to be able to get to that stage. And believe me, there's probably only half a dozen or so people who I can truly say who really, really know me as I know myself. And that relationship with those 6 friends has been built up over decades. It's not something that comes very easily for me, or indeed certainly didn't come easy for them. Maybe if I start at the beginning and give a brief background as to the family, myself, how I got on in education, because actually that's very pertinent and something that I want to probably touch on later on as part of the interviews. And then I also want to sort of touch on the sort of opportunities that fell my way that I want to actually bring out as part of, again, this interview, and certainly if I'm elected, certainly something that's going to be really, really high on my agenda, because, and I'll touch on those again later.
Perfect.
So, yes, I came over to Burton when I was approximately 2 or 3 years old. I can't remember exactly. I can just remember it used to be really dull, dark and dreary and really, really cold in the early 60s when I came. I'm now 62 years old.
Wow.
So, as I say, I was only a toddler, and I can remember the snow being over my knees, because the winters in those days were certainly more extreme than we get at the minute.
I actually remember my parents telling me that the snow was so deep at times, it was over their knees as adults. So it would have been over your head at times.
Absolutely. So, however, it was a start. So I started off in the Uxbridge Infant School, then moved on to Clarence Street, and then there was another junior school on Branston Road that's now the care home, before moving on to Paget School. I was one of the first 6 formers in the Paget School, and I left with 1 A level, which again, I won't say the grade because I'm sure people, but I managed to get 1 A level, despite thinking actually I was quite academically gifted, but when it came to it, I realised actually I wasn't.
I don't know if I would agree with you there, to be honest with you, because I know a lot of people who have been through the academic route and they've not shown or been able to display their competence until they've come out of the academic field. And this might be relatable with you as well, because some people are not made for exams.
Indeed, and I think that's what that came to me, but it came a bit later on in life, unfortunately. However, with my 1 A-level, my 1 A-level, I managed to secure a place on a HND in food technology at Manchester Polytechnic, as it was at the time. Wow. So I spent a couple of years in Manchester, and to be honest, it was the first time, obviously, that anyone from our family had gone to a polytechnic, university, whatever. So it was really, really new for me. I didn't have any role models as such. So I had 2 fantastic years partying. And that is the absolute truth. Academically, again, not much of a success, but I managed to get the HND. But in terms of building up your character and your own understanding yourself and whatever, that's where the real learning actually came. Because up until I left Burton, I was always with white people, my student friends, whatever. I hadn't mixed that much in our own community. And when I went to Manchester Polytechnic, I was exposed to some real northern Pakistanis. And that was a real eye-opener for me, and totally changed my outlook, to be honest.
Right.
And I'm still...
In what way?
It's made me change the way that I thought about certain things and the way that I behaved, and I learnt a lot more about our own culture. As I was well westernized when I was here in Burton up until that time.
Right.
All of my friends were white, and whatever, and it wasn't because I didn't know other Pakistanis, which I just didn't mix in the same sort of circles. So my mentality was a bit different. And so when I went to Manchester, big city, brand new ideas, you know, and the people are much more gritty. It's really, really interesting. It's a bit more difficult to describe now because it's obviously nearly 45 years on from when I'm talking about. But it did change my mentality, and it changed me, and it changed my outlook, and it certainly brought me a lot closer to my own culture. As I say, I managed to secure the HND eventually after having 2 years of fantastic parties. And even now, you know, when I'm at a wedding, I like to think I'm the life and soul of the wedding. It's still those misspent youth. It's still with me now. Right. But that's a different story, maybe for another time.
Yes. Maybe for after you've been elected.
Maybe. Even though I've been told I'm not allowed to do that anymore now because it's not good protocol. Having done the HND in food technology, I still, unfortunately, couldn't secure a job. So I decided to pursue a postgraduate diploma in food technology, thinking maybe if I just get to the next level, that might help. I did that at Humberside College of Higher Education and got a postgraduate diploma. Again, the academic side, I've just about scraped by and got what I needed. It was no distinctions or anything, but I managed to get by. And then I did a short stint at Ross Foods in North Thoresby as a quality controller before moving back home. Food technology, obviously, unfortunately, didn't quite take to me because it was really difficult to get a job in those days in the food industry, despite having the qualifications, despite having a little bit of experience working as well. It just wasn't going to happen. So I decided that maybe I needed a change in direction at that time. So I took a post with East Staffs Borough Council here at the Town Hall. And that was my first real break, actually, because it's the fact that I got into local government and the environment in local government that encourages you to actually be able to fulfill your potential. So I stayed with the housing benefit section for a while, and then there was an opportunity. Well, actually, I was made redundant, and so there was an opportunity as a graduate surveyor that they basically, because I was internal, got sort of relocated into, rather than me and even understanding what a surveyor was or does or anything like that, to be honest. So. But that's the best thing that could ever have happened to me, because it really suited my skill set and whatever. Unfortunately, because of the education that I had secured, it allowed me to go on to the BSc in surveying to be able to get onto the course. So even though the food technology didn't quite take to me, just the fact that I had the qualifications allowed me to get onto the degree course part-time.
Right, because you met the prerequisites.
Because I met the prerequisites, funded by the council, 5 years, whilst I was actually doing the job as well. So
Perfect.
it was ideal. I worked looking after the council's industrial estates that they had at the time.
Right.
There were 5 or 6. There were 1 or 2 in Uttoxeter and 3 or 4 down at the Understaff Industrial Estate, and the other one by Wetmore Road there. I also looked after the council's retail shops that they had under the flats, under the council flats on Rosliston Road, on Hawkins Lane, etc. And that's where I learnt the trade as a surveyor, doing the rent reviews, lease renewals. But the best thing about it was going out and meeting people and talking to them. And you met professional people, you met professional agents, you met people from all sorts of backgrounds and whatever. And that really helped to build up my confidence.
Okay.
Unfortunately, once I had qualified and got my degree, there wasn't anywhere for me to go in at the local council.
Right.
And they encouraged me to move on. And that's when I got my first job in Birmingham City Council. And I was responsible for doing a lot of the clearance around the Saltley Road, around College Road, at the top end of Alum Rock Road. So all of that area that was cleared, it was me who was buying in the properties on behalf and sorting out the compensation for people, etc. So again, very interesting work, because I'm there taking away people's homes, having to negotiate a proper settlement package for them to make sure that they got somewhere else to go. And, you know, these were people who had lived in these houses for a long time.
Yeah.
And here I am coming along to take them away from them. And it was really, really stressful at times, having to deal with those. And you have to learn to, well, I didn't need to learn to be sympathetic, because I was genuinely sympathetic and did whatever I could to make sure that I made the process as easy as I could for them. But there was a lot of
tact and diplomacy.
Diplomacy and tears. And that will stay with me for the rest of my life, because, you know, I genuinely felt for those people, particularly when we couldn't meet all of their expectations, unfortunately. I'll try and keep the rest. Unfortunately,
so you've been there in Birmingham City Council for how many years now?
Well, I've been there for 22 years now.
Okay.
But
you've obviously progressed in those years.
I did about a year and a half before I moved on to Liverpool, and then I did another stint at Coventry, and then I was at Sandwell for 4.5 years as a manager before moving back to Birmingham, and that's where the latest 22 years have come in.
Right.
Sorry, it's just to give a bit more context there. It's not just been the one. I have actually moved around and done lots of different things. When I came back to Birmingham the second time, it was at that stage where I was then, after another year or so, promoted to the head of development and regeneration. And there, I was lucky enough to be profiled in the Estates Gazette.
Okay.
So, and I was really quite pleased with the write-up, because it's not every day that one gets to be published as such.
True.
And
especially before the days of the internet.
Absolutely, yes. And it was like labelled as Birmingham's Mr. Regeneration.
Right.
Now, for the business community at the time, this was an absolute shock, because I was totally unknown to them. And this particular post has always been held by people who had a long-standing business connections and whatever. So when I was appointed to this particular post, it was like, whoa,
who's this guy?
What's happening here? Who's this? Yes, and whatever. But as it says on there, it's the man with a plan. So I'm hoping, as part of what I'll be saying, how I've actually managed to demonstrate how I've delivered what I thought Birmingham needed. I will just put the caveat in that no man is an island, and you're only as good as the team and the people around you to deliver what you need to deliver.
course.
And indeed, you need to work with a multiplicity of agencies
Yeah.
and other professionals and
Of course.
politicians and whatever to
Sure.
actually get these projects delivered. But you need to have that focus, tenacity, and grit, and just keep going. And one thing I always say to my son, and I'll come on to my sons in a short while, is I've never really understood the phrase, the tough get going. Sorry.
When the going gets tough.
Yes. When the going it gets tough, that's when the tough... I didn't really understand that phase until I took this post.
Right.
Because when you start to have to deal with those problems,
Yeah.
and there are always loads and loads of problems, and it's up to you to find that solution to make sure that these things happen, that's when you've got to really dig deep and understand and find ways of unlocking and getting over those barriers. And that's something that I'm trying to instill into them, that doesn't matter how hard something seems to be when you first come across it, you have to find a way of getting round it, under it, sideways, whatever. But there is always a solution, and it's up to you to find that solution. Don't give up.
100%. So right now, you are stood for wanting to become the next MP for Burton and Uttoxeter. Why now?
That's, again, interesting. I literally, a couple of months ago, was offered the opportunity to take redundancy from the council because we're making 600 people redundant, and they wanted to do it voluntarily rather than compulsorily. I put my application in, despite me being quite key in helping them with the problems that they've got, but that's a different story again. That they have accepted the redundancy and are letting me go, and I'm due to finish at the end of July. I was sitting with my brother some 5 weeks ago, who had just returned from Umrah. Some people may know him, Sai Abdul Rahman, at South Broadway Street. And there was some other family members and colleagues sitting around. And someone mentioned that the Workers' Party were looking for a candidate, and would I be interested? I didn't know anything about the Workers' Party or even that they were looking. However, because it was mentioned, I said I'd be happy to have a conversation with someone if that's what they wanted. And a week or so later, I had a call from Zahor, and we agreed to have a chat, and that's how it came about, to be honest. After that chat with Zahor, literally within a week, and Mr. Sunak unfortunately announced that he was going to have an election, so there was a decision to be made.
Yeah, so here's a question. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to run through a series of questions that people have asked me to ask you as well. And before I even go into that, I mean, I've noticed, and I've known your family for several decades, right? You're genuinely a nice guy. You're sincere. I've seen you, even before we switched the cameras on, become quite emotional when we were just talking about Palestine and some of the atrocities taking place. And somebody who's sincere, genuine, somebody who's respectable in the community. And, some people might have the question, well, who is this guy? We haven't heard of him locally. That's not always a negative thing for me, because that means that same guy who you may not have heard of hasn't actually been involved in any controversies or any problems. So that's, there's two ways of looking at that. So my question to you is, somebody who is sincere, somebody who I see as a genuine person, to the cause, why enter the world of politics where there's so much dangers and filth, and there's a lot of question marks in the world of politics alone? Why enter the world of politics? You could literally just, as you mentioned earlier to me, you could have just chilled out, taken your retirement, gone abroad, had a holiday, come back, and then got on with the rest of your life. Why politics?
I could indeed, but again, it's not something that's come easily for me because
You're not a career politician.
I'm absolutely no career politician. I'll just make it clear. I've never had any affiliations to any political parties and whatever. And it's literally only 5 weeks since I've joined the Workers' Party. And the reason that I've joined the Workers' Party is because their stance on Palestine and what's happening in Gaza at the minute.
So before you did that, sorry to cut you short,
Yes.
Are you saying that up until 5 weeks ago, you'd never had any aspirations of getting into politics?
It was not even in my wildest dreams, never mind aspirations.
Right.
It was not even on the agenda. Right. My intentions were to take my retirement at the end of July. I was going to go for a bit of an extended holiday, come back, and then, look for something part-time to keep myself active or do something else in the community or do something. I've still got some people in Birmingham who are interested in doing some work with me as well. And that's from a charitable type organisations rather than businesses that I still want to help best I can and give some time back to. So that was the plan.
Yeah,
really.
But then the Gaza thing happened, and that's what's drawn you in.
Well, the Gaza thing was happening anyway. It's been happening for a while now, but it was the opportunity to really, I suppose, if I was going to, I made the decision once he called the snap election that yes, maybe it's something that I really need to do to stand up and be counted, and that's why I've done it, inshallah. So I can actually stand up and be counted. I think I've got some valuable experience that I can bring to the role. And all I can do is give it my best shot. I appreciate the Everest that I have to climb, but I don't take things lightly. As I said just earlier on, when there's difficulties, you have to find ways of getting over those and passing those and still coming out and delivering what you need to do. Yeah. And so far as I'm concerned, in the last 4 weeks or whatever it's been, I've given it a lot of my time and effort and whatever, and I wouldn't have done that, and I needn't have done that if I wasn't convinced that I was going to try and make a difference. I could quite easily have taken the nomination and done a minimum amount because, everyone's saying it's a two-horse race between the Conservatives and the Labour. I don't believe that.
Well, looking at last election's results, I think 60% went to Conservatives, 30 went to Labour, and 10 between Workers, Greens and whatnot. I think the dynamics are going to change this year anyway, because Conservatives aren't as favourites as they have been in the past. But what I've noticed even on social media platforms is a lot of people who may have voted for Conservatives are now looking at reform.
Indeed.
So there's a shift in the landscape there. Going back to what you were saying, that you have things to offer which could be transferred, what would you say would be the qualities from your roles thus far are transferable into this new path?
Whilst I am no career politician, I've had to deal with politicians from all persuasions, obviously from a very neutral position. So I know how to deal with politics. I know how to make sure that what we have to provide to the politicians is absolutely checked, correct, make sure that it's what they need. And there's a lot of difference in those words. You need to be really careful that all of the fact checking is done. It's all rechecked again. And when I'm talking about need, it's not what they think that you have to service what they actually want. You have to tell them what it is that the truth is. And it's up to them then how they use that information. As a neutral, I have to be and have been totally impartial in the basic information that's provided. How people then use that, either statistically or otherwise, unfortunately, we don't have any control over. However, we do put in the relevant caveats as to how that information should be used. So I know how things can be manipulated and whatever. It's not something that I intend to do, because at the end of the day, a fact is a fact, and that's how it should be seen. So I'll be using some of those transferable skills, as you've mentioned, in terms of the way that I've negotiated with people, got to understand what's required and how to deliver that, and be able to deal with people from all walks of life. I've sat in very fancy boardrooms all over the country, and been able to look after the council's position. Here, the role is slightly reversed, because you have to look after your constituents, and you have to look after their issues, and you have to know how to put those forward in a manner that's actually going to be credible and be able to influence people. Once there's mentioning influence, that's really, really important. It's dead easy to say, I can influence this, that and the other. Actually, there's a real skill into it. And it's not always what you know, it's who you know and how you know them, and how you can then use that to actually get what you want. So if I can give an example of when I'm doing some projects, once I've protected the base position and my red lines in a negotiation, it's then just trying to get to what extra can I get on top for the public, and that's where that influencing bit really kicks in, because the technique that I use is, right, we've got to where nearly got to, I don't tell them we've nearly got to where we need to do, but for the rest of it to get to what you need to help me to help you. And that's how I get that extra bit of value out of people.
Right.
But you've got to know where you're coming from in a negotiation, know what your red lines are, know what
the non-negotiables.
Non-negotiables are manage people's expectations below you, so you can then over-deliver for them.
Yeah.
Once you get there.
So here's a question for you. You're standing with the Workers' Party.
Yes.
Why not independent?
Because I wouldn't have. I mean, not that I've had a lot of support from the Workers' Party. It just makes it a little bit easier.
In what way?
In the way that this actual political system is set up.
Okay.
If you're an independent, the way that you do your fundraising is totally against you.
Right.
Every £50 or so that you have to, you manage to fundraise, you have to be able to account for in a particular way. It's just so much more restrictive. Whereas if you're with a party, the rules are slightly easier to follow.
Right.
And that's just one example as to why it's easier to be with a party than as a total independent.
Aside from the fundraising and aside from the financial aspects, are there any other like meaningful reasons for which reason you thought you'd do this and rather than go independent?
As I say, I had no intention of going into politics.
Okay.
So there was no, I can do this independently.
Right.
The only reason I'm doing it is because the Workers' Party, we've had a conversation, and that's
just made sense to you.
And it made sense to me, and I'm fully on board with the majority of the policies that are there, and so that's where I'm coming from, really.
Okay, so here's an interesting question then, because sometimes, because we have these conversations offline, we have conversations amongst families, friends, and stuff like that, and sometimes we get into all sorts of conversations which are deep, philosophical, value-driven, and we follow certain values, we follow certain theologies, different people follow different things. What would you do then if let's just say, for example, something that the Workers' Party proposed, which went against your values, what would you do?
I would vote against it. I have to be true to myself
100%.
before I can be true to anyone else, because otherwise I would be a con artist. And unfortunately, I've not stood to be a con artist. I've not stood to do anything outside it that goes against my own principles, unfortunately. And if they're not happy with that, then they're quite happy. I'm quite happy for them to ask me to resign, and I would do that without hesitation. I've got nothing to gain in this particular instance, other than for me to try and do the best that I can for the cause that we're all fighting for.
Perfect. So, I mean, related to that, because obviously there have been criticisms of everybody. Nobody's free from criticism in some way, shape, or form. Whether it's fair or unfair is another thing altogether, because there have been criticism against the way maybe the party might be run, or maybe the leaders of parties in so many different ways. I mean, we've seen just what's happened with the Conservatives and the anti-Islamic and anti-Muslim rhetoric that they've been spewing, again to appease or appeal to the far right or the right wing. Those lines are blurred as it is now. You've got the likes of Nigel Farage's Party Reform, who have been talking about Bangladeshis recently. So, and then you got that's the Labour Party. Labour Party, sorry. And Nigel Farage's party, that guy was generally being racist.
So, yes.
So, everybody's got some kind of criticism. Here's a question for you in terms of, because I know you've just mentioned that you will follow what your values mean to you rather than just generic, blindly following the party. Because there have been criticism related to George Galloway and his maybe lack of response or support for people like Bashar al-Assad when you've got the Yarmouk, the Palestinians in that camp. There were, refugees, so many people. Because I'm just curious, this was one of the questions which one of my colleagues asked, what would you do, again, if a situation like that happened again, where the party leader is... Okay, there's values, but there's also extra things outside your immediate value system, which might be related. If something like that happened today, what would be your response?
Everyone is entitled to their own opinion. I can't control the party leader's opinion. He will have his own opinion, and I don't necessarily need to agree with that all of the time. In terms of how support is or non-support is provided internationally to people, I think there needs to be a debate around that, so we're all absolutely clear what it is that we're actually trying to achieve and how we may want to achieve that. Because if you don't have that common understanding, that's when people can use that to divide you, unfortunately. So you really... these are matters of policy that need to be debated at appropriate levels, at conferences, at whatever, local meetings and whatever, and then, you need to come out with a common consensus. Like everything else, even when you are making business decisions as a board, whilst you try to get some unanimity, not everyone will always agree on the board. For example, when we're looking at interest rates at the minute, you have a few people all dissent, a few people all say, no, we need to put them up. Some will say, no, they need and that's part of democracy for you. So you have to go with the majority. And in that majority, as I say, you can either abstain or do something different if it doesn't fit with your values. But the majority of the time, if you're obviously part of a party, you need to follow a party line. And it's just, hopefully there shouldn't be any more than 5% of the time where you would need to dissent from that.
Yeah, I mean, I've looked at the website. The party has some really good stuff from what I thought. I mean, from a layperson's perspective. And I think that every party can put up things which sound good. the question arises then, for example, you mentioned the democratic system and you go with the majority. My question would be, how do you propose anybody gets any meaningful change happening if you are having to convince 600 other people in Westminster to follow what you're proposing? And if that never gets done, I mean, let's take Israel as an example. You've got the highest courts in the world who have ruled certain things for a ceasefire or for things to stop. The UN warrants are being sought from the ICJ or the ICC, is it? The ICJ. One of the two. You've got still a lot of the world's countries going against or actually putting up and saying, look, you know what, this is wrong. What Israel is doing is wrong. This has to stop. But you've got the biggest allies, UK and the US, wanting to still support and still support it. They've not even called for a ceasefire, okay? Even after all this long time, considering that the highest courts in the world have said that Israel is plausibly committing a genocide. It's been investigated, but it's plausible that they're committing a genocide. Yet our nation states, alongside the US, haven't been able to even say anything negative about Israel. How does any group of people get anything to change?
With great difficulty, unfortunately, and that is the truth of the matter. The system over the last 70 or so years has been so biased against the Palestinians right from the Balfour Declaration that unfortunately, because of that very lack of control right at the beginning, and the Zionists not being held to account early on, they've just grown and got a culture now where they can just do whatever they want with impunity. And that just isn't just at the local level in the West Bank, in Gaza or anywhere else. You know, they've been encouraged to a certain extent externally to do whatever. You know, if we talk about all of the assassinations and things that have happened all around the world for people who they deem to be or could cause trouble for them, they've all been supported by the West. And it just unfortunately really pains me that that the general public is sort of just kept in the dark about all of these sort of things. You know, you've mentioned about how you get change and how you get things done. A very small microcosm of that is, and I can explain it in the work that we do, or I've done, is when something really big needs to happen, the first thing that happens is the two parties at the highest level get together and they have meetings and they thrash out exactly what it is that they want and how they want it. And then it's filtered back down to the level below them to start working out on the detail of it. And then it comes down to the level below them again, just to see how we're going to put the delivery mechanisms in place and whatever. And then it will come down another layer to make sure that the actual process and democracy and whatever is seen to be done. The decisions are made a lot higher up early on. The democratic bit of it is done right at the end, just to sign it all off afterwards. And when all of those things are understood and the mechanisms and whatever. And that's the truth of the matter. And that's a very small, easy way of explaining what's actually happening at the international level.
So if that's how complex it is, what change do we really expect to make after these elections?
The only change that can be made is at that international level, and the pressure that we need to keep putting on the international courts, on other countries who know what's happening, because
some of them are complicit in it.
Some are complicit on it, and there are others who are trying to stop it. You know, we have South Africa who's bringing up these cases. We have more countries joining them now as well to try and help them with that. So it's not, at least some people are now starting to wake up. Unfortunately, it's just so embedded it's really, really difficult to get it changed,
So-
and that's the fact of it.
Yeah,
and
so-
we've just got to keep the pressure up.
Yeah. So I suppose the question is, how far do you go about just what does that pressure look like, and how realistic is that change? Look, you've got the Labour Friends of Israel, you've got the Conservative Friends of Israel. Imagine, any other country became friends with political party. Would you not see that as like another country is infiltrating into our political system, and we're okay with that? We just happen to be okay with that. These guys have got deep pockets. Look at the APAC in America. They just recently be bragging that every single one of their candidates has been nominated.
Yeah,
They're outright bragging about
absolutely,
it.
absolutely.
The world can see what's happening, yet remains quiet. How do we, as a community, then? Because look, we want the same thing. You and I want the same thing. We might have different views about how we go about getting those things, but we want the same thing. Some of the more pressing questions that I've received to ask you is, how do you actually see your role making a meaningful difference, considering the way the political landscape is? Some of the things that you've just described yourself, how higher up, even from our own parliamentarians, these decisions are made on an international level, and then the democratically elected decisions are just the last bit of the puzzle.
It's tough. And it doesn't matter to a certain extent as to who actually gets elected, because they're all going to have the same issues and the same problems and whatever, whether those are going to be local issues or whether they're going to be international issues, unfortunately. And even if you were to vote for someone whose government it is that's going to form the next government, if they have a pertinent local issue, they're still going to have to fight through the same political machinery to get that onto the agenda and discussed and passed and whatever. And there's no guarantee that will happen, irrespective of who those are. Or the role of the MP effectively is to make sure that you properly research what requires to be done. You consult with your constituents to make sure that what they want is being raised, and you do your best to make sure that you properly research and then articulate that to the best of your ability, and work with other colleagues in Parliament to gather some support. There's always been cross-party working on different issues. It's not always so black and white that you can't, do things with other colleagues in Parliament. And it's the same thing that happens in councils. You always get those issues that are fully supported by everyone because they just make sense. And it's the right thing to do.
Let me ask you a question. You worked in Birmingham City
Yes.
Council. You know a lot of the politicians there. You know
Yes.
a lot of business people there, and people of influence there. What is it that's led to even politicians in Birmingham to refrain from voting for a ceasefire, even though they say they are pro-Palestinians? What do you think it is?
It comes back to maybe them looking after some of their self-interest, potentially. I'm not saying that's for everyone. It could be that they seem to have an idea that they can make a difference if they stay in the party rather than they resign on principle, because some people say the only way to make a difference is if you're actually in there. If you don't have a voice at the table, then you don't have a voice at the table if there's no one there. So you can't have a dissenting voice. But if they stay and they then don't raise those issues and have that dissenting voice, then they may well as
the thing is, I don't think. So
resigned.
a lot of the times, I feel that a lot of politicians from Southeast Asian politicians who have been lifted into these positions by the local communities have started off with good intentions. I think most of them will have. This is me being, optimistic in all of this. But you see, when they're in that position, then there is not much maneuverability for them. They either become a part of the system, which is a corrupt system, and they have to follow the party line, or they start following their own interests, and they're looking out for themselves, and they become those career politicians, which myself and Chris Williamson were talking about, your colleague from Derby. And he was saying the moment you become a career politician, it's all over. You have to serve the people. So I think some people start off with good intentions, but the system is so corrupt from what I can see as a layperson, everybody who goes in there. This is why I was asking you. You're a nice guy. I see you being sincere, and you obviously care. I can see that in you. So going back to that question of going into the parliament and then trying to make that change, look at what happened. Was it Tahir Ali or Tahir Mahmood?
Yeah,
who
Tahir
actually,
Ali.
Yeah, Tahir Ali. He said something in parliament, and then 25 minutes later, he apologized.
Yeah. Unfortunately, some of it comes down to training, because you need to be able to articulate yourself in a particular manner but still get the point over. And that it's easier sometimes to say things, but again, if they're not unfortunately articulated, that it's easy for people then to manipulate your words. So you really do need to stop and think before you say what your intentions are. There's still ways and means of being able to say what you want. And those career politicians are the ones who've had that training, so they understand how to make those points. Or
they could make a point to appease their constituents and then apologise afterwards.
And then it's easier to apologise afterwards. But personally, some of it comes down to experience and training and being able to.
You don't feel that there's a system that's kind of
there is definitely a
it's
system,
like a plug in the sink that you just lift at and everybody just goes down it.
There's definitely that, but you need to be able to understand how that system. It's like everything else. You need to know the rules of the game. If you don't know the rules of the game, that's when you start to make those schoolboy errors. And
can you think of anybody at any point throughout our living history or living memory who has gone into the system and actually delivered? Anybody?
Unfortunately, and I'd like no, I can't, because even we've had some really high caliber people in government, even as chairs of the Conservative Party with Baroness Waris, etc. We've had Javid,
very competent.
Absolutely, people. We've had Sajid Javid, who's been a cabinet member. And even those people have failed. And those are people with long-standing political histories.
They've become a part of the system.
They've had to become part of the political system.
Well, there's always a choice. I would argue there's always a choice. If you're a career politician, then you have to become a part of the system. If you're not a career politician and you're there sincerely to deliver for the people, then you don't have to.
No, but that's when you're cast aside.
Yeah, exactly.
And unfortunately, if we look at both of those two examples, that's where we are. Yeah,
so in reality then, what we're saying is there's two options. You either get cast aside for being genuine and sincere, or you become a part of the system.
Or in our case, if you're part of a party that actually cares, all you can do is carry on raising a dissenting voice, because they can't cast us aside if we're there.
What's going to happen different this time? George Galloway's been in Parliament several times now as an MP. What do you think is going to be different this time?
If he gets re-elected again, he will carry on with that voice, and even more stronger. I'm hoping that there will be at least double figures in the party who do manage to get in from the West Midlands, from the North. Hopefully my colleague Chris Williamson will get in as well. I'm absolutely trying my best to make sure that we disrupt whatever's happening here in Burton. If you start to have the numbers, then again, it comes back to whether you like it or not, you do need to work with other parties as well of like mind on particular issues to get things done and raised. And again, I'm talking from a very ill-informed political point
Because you're not a career
I'm not
politician.
and I haven't done this, but this is just how I think
That's how
it
you
works,
see things.
and that's how I see things. So
Yeah.
that's all I can say. To
No,
be
of
honest.
course. So I'm going to run through some questions which
Yes.
some of the public have asked, right? So Dil Sultan has asked the question. He says, ask about the cost of living crisis. How will we make the people of the country prosperous again? How can we steer it back on course in a meaningful way? How can we leave a world of peace and prosperity for our children instead of problems for them to overcome?
That's difficult questions to sort of answer, really, but I shall give it a good go. In terms of poverty, one of the things that I stand in for, and this isn't the Workers' Party policy, is that I want to campaign for and argue for a reduction in standing charges on people's fuel bills. That's the very basic amount that everyone pays, irrespective of how much you use it or not. And it has an absolutely disproportionate effect on the lower paid, on the unpaid, unwaged people than it does on people, with the higher salaries, because it's a much smaller proportion for them. And so personally, that's something that I really want to campaign for. I'm hoping that I would be able to get other like-minded people to support me on that if I'm elected. And I think once we get that out there could be a groundswell of people who would support such a policy, because the utilities are making super profits off the back of poor people. And it's just, for me, it's common sense that the minimum they should be doing is either capping or scrapping that particular charge. And that has the quickest effect on the lowest and the unwaged and the people in poverty.
I've noticed you've made your own pledge, pledges on the website that I saw on the Workers' Party. So Azmat Mir's pledges: public ownership, a pledge to advocate for the public ownership of key industries and services, decent housing, protect the NHS, workers' rights, and education for all. Here's a question for you. Another popular question that comes off the back of this, because a lot of parties are making a lot of promises. We want to do this, we want to reduce this tax, we want to reduce that tax, we want to make you wealthy again, we want to make you you're more prosperous again. Where do you get the money for that?
We spend so much money unnecessarily on by sending it abroad on supporting wars unnecessarily.
Good point.
It really just breaks my heart when we have people living off food banks. We can't afford to fix our schools. Our hospitals are woefully underfunded, and yet we all of a sudden, whenever there's a war, we can suddenly find £60 billion to send someone to go. And unfortunately, these wars are not about self-defense. If it was self-defense, I would have absolutely no problem with that whatsoever. But there's not been a single war that I can see from my perspective, other than maybe the Falklands, and I'll come to that because there's a special point that I want to make about the Falklands War in a bit, that is self-defense. And just whilst I'm talking about the Falklands, and we've touched on the issue with Gaza, and internationally it's recognised as, an occupation. So if we can agree that there's an occupation there, and if I then sort of bring in how Argentina went and occupied the Falklands, what did we do? Mrs. Thatcher sent a whole armada to the other side of the world to go and free those islands from occupation.
100%.
What the general public doesn't probably know is that the Israeli government was actually selling weapons to the Argentinians that were being used to blow up those British warships.
Wow.
People need to do their own research and not just be sort of take whatever politicians tell them as the truth and for granted.
100%.
If the British have the right to go and liberate a land that is their land under occupation, why is that right not being afforded to the Palestinians?
Yeah, I mean, there's a good question, isn't it? Which other land has the Western world ever freed?
Yes.
Other than occupying, they've occupied
Yes.
most of the world.
Yeah.
It's been a very imperialistic kind of a way of governing the people, and so it's occupied, pillaged, and it's drawn resources out of most of the world. Yet it's not freed any particular one that's been under subjugation.
No, other than the Falklands.
Yeah,
which they've done for their own self-interest, which is fine. Because if they've got a claim to that territory, then I fully agree that should be protected. But that right, same right, should be afforded to other people. You know, we're talking about Keir Starmer and what he's saying about the Bangladeshis at the minute. It's common knowledge that, you know, Bangladesh used to be a prosperous place before the British went in. When they left, it was the saddest place.
Yeah, well, nobody talks about the Bengal famine, do they?
You know,
it's history.
And that's all deliberate.
Yes.
All deliberate by the establishment.
Brainwashing.
And everything else. The public are never told the real truth.
Yeah.
It's only, 50 years after, 100 years after they're asked to apologise for what they did. Yeah. 200 years afterwards. That's, we've been hearing these apologies recently around slavery, around this, that and the other.
Yes.
But, why commit these atrocities in the first place? Why be complicit in these atrocities in the first place?
Well, they get away with it, don't they?
They
at that moment in time, they get away with it. They get what they want, what they set out for, their objective. They complete their objective, and then they'll come out and they'll defend themselves for a while. Then eventually they'll say, actually, you know what? It was a previous generation. We're sorry. That shouldn't have happened. It's a bit too late then, isn't it?
It is.
But by that time, they've already succeeded in what they wanted from it in the first place.
And the damage has been done. Unfortunately, I mean, if we look at the Iraq War now, it's all founded on lies,
100%.
And they knew that, but they still went ahead and did whatever because, I don't want to be making accusations that I can't substantiate, but I wouldn't be surprised if there are other international hands behind all of that.
I don't think anybody would be surprised, to be fair, would they? On that note, to be honest, there was something that you mentioned about, you mentioned Gaza, you mentioned Palestine, and this is something you've not just been looking at recently, is it? Because you were showing me something earlier, which would be interesting to see again. Catherine Ergang asked the question, and that was more of a statement than a question, that she was saying, I fear a lot of these parties are just using Muslims at the moment, and personally, I think we're being taken for a ride, and they're using the Gaza situation to get votes. What would you say to that?
I would say to Catherine, this is not a new phenomenon, unfortunately. And again, it's part of the establishment not to sort of tell the public the truth. I recently, literally yesterday, came across a book that I had some 30-odd years ago called The Intifada, a message from the Palestinian people. Now, and this book actually still contains a lot of my old original speeches. There's one here for an emergency motion to the regional council, because I was a member of Unison at the time, and I used to go to the national conferences, and I did this particular speech on an emergency motion to stop regional war, where, the Americans were doing various things. I think this was around the time of the Twin Towers coming down. But this is all linked back to all of these conflicts, unfortunately. And these issues have been going on a lot longer. They're not just a result of, the 7th of October or whatever. They go back decades and decades and decades.
Well, they'll have you believe that everything started on the 7th of October.
They will, because it suits their purpose, unfortunately. And it's the way that the party machines are all set up, and the publicity and the control of the media. I know everyone keeps saying, "Oh no, the media's not controlled; it's free." I'm sorry, but I just can't believe
not
that.
true.
That just isn't true.
You just have to look at
you know.
you just have to look at the disparity between what the media here reports, especially the likes of Rupert Murdoch empire, Daily Mail and including the BBC. No, it's not Rupert Murdoch, part of Murdoch empire, but including the BBC. They're complicit in this as well. And a lot of the tabloid and GB News, Talk TV in the US. There's this, Fox News, and they are pushing a certain narrative. But in contrast, you look at any other media outlet or what's actually happening on the ground, and you have a look at what the Palestinians are recording on their own phones. You'll see a big disparity. So who do you believe? Do you believe somebody sitting behind a desk in a first world country telling you what to believe, or do you believe the person who's actually living it and is showing you this is what's actually happened? The 40 beheaded babies lies that basically became the catalyst for all these atrocities taking place. And then it was proven that there was no 40 babies, beheaded babies. But it's too late now.
It's too late, and it's because they've been using these narratives for so long. They just pull one that suits them off the shelf.
Yeah,
when it comes, unfortunately, and the difficulty that the other people, there aren't the same sort of mechanisms elsewhere to counter that narrative, to be able to get that airspace, to be able to get that print, unfortunately. Social media certainly has started to help a little bit more but even then they pull down the posts that they think are going to make it a bit more difficult for them.
Yeah.
I was with the rapper earlier on this afternoon, Loki.
Yeah.
And he was saying how
he's
his music,
he's a legend,
absolute
he's
legend,
a bank of knowledge.
But even then, they take down his music because it gets uncomfortable. The truth is always uncomfortable for the perpetrators.
And the thing is, that brings you to the point, doesn't it? Well, you talk about freedom of speech.
Yes.
But it's selective freedom of speech. And then you can obviously see that as well. There's no such thing as the freedom of speech unequivocally, or unqualified. There's always a caveat somewhere. Look at the lady who called Rishi Sunak and Swallow Brabham coconuts. That's freedom of speech, isn't it? It is, isn't it, though? Right? If a black person and black people call each other the N-word, it's up to them. Are you going to start monitoring that now? You and me can call each other a P-word. Are you going to start? It might not be nice, but it's you call somebody a coconut and you get arrested for that.
Freedom of speech is only for those who deem themselves to be free. Unfortunately, in my opinion, as you say, it is very, very selective, and it's no different to the same narrative that they use when they want to people. When people are being Islamophobic, it's freedom of speech to criticise Islam. Yet, as soon as you criticise Israel, it's no longer
100%.
It's no longer freedom of speech. It then becomes anti-Semitic.
This is the conflation.
It's the same double standards, triple standards that unfortunately exist.
Exactly. You can say anything you want against Jesus Christ.
Yes.
You can say anything what you want against the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. You can say anything against God. You can say anything against the king, the queen, the president, whatever. But you say anything against Israel. That's a red line.
Absolutely.
You can't even deny the Holocaust.
No.
And it's one of my fellow podcasters. He said once that if it was only Israel who told us about the Holocaust, I wouldn't believe it because they're such big liars. But we have other sources to tell us that it happened. Isn't that fascinating? Freedom of speech is no freedom of speech. Really.
Well, it's interesting that even Holocaust survivors are not happy with the way that the Israeli 100%. State is behaving.
But the thing is, they're
respect those.
No, they're self-hating. They're self-hating Jews. That's what they are. They're anti-Semitic still. Look at the Labour Party. How many people have been kicked out? Corbyn, Chris Williamson, even Jewish MPs kicked off for being anti-Semitic. And then you have debates where people who are atheists are telling Jewish people who live in Israel that they've got it wrong and they've got it right. This is the world we've come to. This is the madness that we're in, right?
Indeed.
Moving on, because I've got another question for you. Shehzad Hussain has asked that it's been roughly the same time with this Palestine situation. There's been the Kashmir situation. We've had several Kashmiri MPs in Parliament. Why hasn't anything? If something was likely to have been done, it would have been done by now. So why hasn't anything been done about Kashmir? In fact, it's gone worse.
Because it doesn't suit the ruling elite. It doesn't suit the party politics. It doesn't suit various international interests. Because if these conflicts are ever resolved, then who are they going to sell the weapons to?
True.
Where
always follow the money, right?
You have to. That's one of the main things that I learnt in my career, and I always say this to my son as well. Always follow the money.
Yeah,
absolutely. You have to follow the money, and that will then lead you to the truth.
Yeah.
It's one of the main avenues to actually getting to the truth.
The money trail.
The money trail, but it's hidden so well.
Yeah.
Nowadays, whilst they can trace every single pound that you and I spend and whatever, when it comes to actually tracing how the billions of pounds are spent, that's a totally different matter. And the way that is all laundered.
Yeah.
Yet, if I go and want to change £50 for whatever number of rupees, it can be seen as money laundering. It's absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah, 100%. I think, on the note of looking at change and looking at potential ways of changing the narrative or actually getting some kind of action done, if we look at the way that the collectives have made a difference, there is also an alternative. I know politics is an option for those who believe that's the right route to be able to instigate change or motivate people to change. But I think from my lifetime, when I've seen real change happen, is when people have come together collectively for a cause and been diligent in their approach. Look at what happened to Elbit Systems. This wasn't done through politics.
No.
Look at what's happening on university campuses. That's not politics as such. These are people with the motivation for change and the passion and the zeal to do something collectively, and they believe in what they're doing. And I think this is something that we also as a community have to look into going forwards. Look, 4th of July will come and go. The elections will come and go. I wish you the best. But whatever happens after the 4th of July, that shouldn't be the end. It should be something that we look at as an opportunity to gather everybody together, collectively get together, and not just Muslims and non-Muslims. I don't want you to make this just like a Muslim thing, because you're standing not just for Muslims, you're standing for everybody, right? So whether you're Muslim or not, the truth is the truth. We can see that this country is going down the pan in so many different ways. The cost of living crisis, we look at the bills going up, the privatization, people making, the rich are getting richer, the poor are getting poorer, the taxes that the rich aren't paying, that can get away with not paying taxes, and those people who are working class end up paying for a lot of the income that is going into taxes, right? So things aren't exactly getting easier for the average person out there. So if we want to create change, we have to create a united voice. We have to create a united way of moving forward. And that's my 2 pence worth on that. And, I came in this conversation thinking that, what? We'll talk about George Galloway. We'll talk about the Workers' Party. I might give you a bit of a grilling on certain things, but I can't, because I see you as a sincere, genuine person wanting good. I can't see anything that, I could pick up and say, you know what? I got you. There is nothing. You are who you are. And that's refreshing to see, because a lot of these career politicians that we've seen, these people who are already or been leading us, representing us, people like Kate Niverton locally and others, there's no sincerity. I can't see anything. So thank you very much for coming in. I just want to give you the final say in terms of anything that you want to share out as a message to the community. Feel free. The floor is yours. Just
a couple of points. I'll just pick up on the Kate Niverton one. I over the last 4 years, have been writing to Kate on the Gaza and Palestine thing, and some of those letters have been the ones that are pushed on social media, or sign this, send it to whatever. However, I sent her a very personal note making it absolutely clear that this was nothing to do with Islam, Zionism, whatever. It was around being a human and the way that the Palestinians were being treated, and that she should do her own research around that and whatever. Unfortunately, to this day, I've never had a response to that very personal letter that I sent to her. So I'd just like to put that on record, that it's unfortunate that whilst she used to respond to the other letters with the government spiel and whatever, the very personal one that I sent to her, unfortunately, she was unable to respond to me. However,
or chose not to respond,
or chose not to respond to me. But it is there, and I just wanted to put that on record that that's the case. In terms of finishing this off, and we've touched on Gaza and a number of things and whatever, and I keep mentioning that this isn't new. This has been going on for a very long time. I really do just want to make this point about this being a message from, it was at that time 3 generations of Gaza, of Palestinians. It's now obviously a lot more generations from when this particular book was written. And there's just a few short verses that I would like to use from this particular book, just to make people understand that what was being written over 30 years ago is actually what is now coming to pass. And if we can let this continue for another 30 years, I don't know where humanity will be. So I'm not going to read all of the verses. I'll just be selective in a few that I used. It's our belated realization that neither Israel nor its supporters have the slightest intention of giving us our rights. It is our decision to live free or die trying. It's a message from us to Israel, and through Israel to the United States and the rest of the world, and it reads as follows. We will no longer be a subject people. If you order us to disperse, we will assemble. Shoot us if you will, and that is exactly what they are doing. If you direct us, or if you instruct us to buy your produce and your products, we will grow and make our own. Destroy our houses and our gardens, if you will. Again, exactly what's happening
right now.
This is really difficult for me to read out. If you rule that we must carry our identity cards, we will carry Palestinian flags. Cut off our water supply and starve us if you will. Not only are they starving them, they're bombing them in addition to that. If one of us falls, 10 of us will take his place. Drag 10 of us to your jails, and we will find 100 waiting for you when you return. Break 20 arms, and a storm of stones thrown by a town full of healthy arms will explode around you. It's common knowledge that one of the Prime Ministers of Israel was saying, we're being really beneficent to the Palestinians now. Instead of shooting them, we're breaking their arms with iron bars. When your bullets make us childless, we will adopt the children whom you have orphaned. This is just too difficult for me to carry on. But this is what was happening 30 years ago. And in 30 years, we've done nothing to make it improve. And if by me standing, I can try and make a difference, Alhamdulillah, that is what I will try and do. If I can't, then at least I will say that I have tried. I can't say any more than that, but the rest of it is too difficult for me to read.
I think that's an apt time to close this chapter and
Thank you.
conclude this this particular episode of the podcast. It's very moving, by the way, to see that was written 30 years ago. There's exact same things are happening today, and they saw their own future with what was happening, and nothing has been done up till now.
No.
But Azmat, Jazakallah khair. Thank you so much for joining me here today. It's been a fascinating conversation, long overdue as well, and I wish you all the best. And hopefully, even after the 4th of July, we get to mobilize together. Inshallah.
Thank you very much. Really
Jazakallah
appreciate you
very
having
much.
me on.
Thank
Thank you. Bye.